Good day, everyone, and welcome back to Intelligent Automation World Series. My name is Rochelle Hood, and I have the pleasure of serving as SSON's Global Head of Customer Analytics and Research, but more importantly, today's moderator for the session this afternoon. This is the third session. We've had quite a great kickoff to the World Series so far today. We learned from Guy at UiPath this morning a bit about how to stop worrying and love RPA and AI, and actually how AI will change society. Shortly after that, we had the promise of RPA, some great insights from research that was done by Forbes Insights and PwC. Got some outcomes from that and talking about whether or not the technology meets the expectations. And now it's my absolute pleasure for us to have this session, the Automation Foundation's Essentials, hosted by Agilify. But before I introduce the team, let me get you to a couple of logistics that will have to make sure you get the most out of today's session. So in your audience view, you're going to see two important boxes on the left-hand side of your screen. The Q&A box you're going to use for two things. If you have any technical issues, challenges, or problems with the platform, please put those in there, and Aya, who's providing our technical support today, will get right back to you with some assistance. Also, if you have questions related to the conference as a whole, that's also the place that you'll put that there, and she'll help you with anything you need to know about the Digital Week conference. And then additionally, and most importantly, we get the most out of this session, truly, myself as the moderator and the team that's going to deliver to you today, when you engage, whether it's comments, questions, thoughts, experiences that you have, begin to put those in just as soon as we kick off. We'll be staging those up, breaking periodically for that, and then addressing all the questions at the end. So engage early, ask often, and we look forward to your participation that way. And then next, the final logistics to walk you through are it's always a benefit just to get the information, but more than that, we have 3 bonus items for you, our little digital gift bag underneath the resource list. The H1 2018 Global Intelligent Automation Report, a wealth of information, and we are so lucky to have one of the co-contributors of that report be one of the panelists today. You'll hear more about that in their discussion. And then also, you're going to hear a lot of information about what you need to learn about this product to put it in effectively and really adopt that from a training perspective in truly organizational management as well. You'll see 2 service catalogs that will be highlighted both from the Academy and from the advisory that are available to you. You can download those all now, or if you don't get to it because you're going to be so enticed to all the material, no worries. Tomorrow you'll receive an email with a link to the recording of this session. You may download all of that material at that time as well. So with all those wonderful logistics out of the way, let me welcome the team to the stage. So I'd like to introduce Scott Cheeple. He's the Chief Technology Officer for Agilify. He's responsible for the strategy for Agilify Automation. He has been on operational excellence, service delivery teams, and service delivery, RPA, RDA, and cognitive practices. He also has led continuous improvement, intelligent RPA, and augmented intelligence on large-scale organizations. He's formerly a leader in architectural design and has more than 20 years of information technology leadership, technical architecture, and product research and development. He's definitely passionate. You'll hear that as he delivers today about the advancement of augmented intelligence and how we can use it to unleash human potential. So let's hear about that human potential. Scott, let me turn the digital stage over to you.
Thanks, Rochelle. I'm so excited to be talking to everyone today. Before I get into it, let me just talk a little bit about Agilify. We are dedicated to focus to the intelligent automation industry. We are practitioners first. Our learnings have allowed us to provide automation consulting through the advisory and training services that Rochelle talked about. Our journey over the last 5+ years have brought us to a level of appreciation that we were able to share lessons learned to shorten our clients' learning curve. And with us today to provide insights into that automation journey is Lee Coulter, the CEO of Ascension Ministry Service Center. Welcome, Lee.
Thank you.
I'm so appreciative to have Lee with us. Lee is an expert in the outsourcing strategy and operational transformation. He currently leads the shared service operations of the largest nonprofit healthcare system in the United States, bringing him more than 30 years of experience in leadership roles in companies like General Electric, Aon, and Kraft Foods. He serves on numerous boards and advisory committees for the organizations such as HFS Research, the chair of the IEEE Working Group on Standards and Intelligent Process Automation, the Shared Services and Outsourcing Network, the World ITO BPO Forum, and the Frontier Strategy Group. Welcome, Lee.
Thank you.
All right, so Rochelle, back to you.
Okay, so we are going to have an action-packed delivery for you today. I just wanted to let you thanks for those introductions. Again, let me just emphasize before the team starts presenting that you can ask your questions now or at any time. Just put them in that Q&A box, and we'll go ahead and take some breaks and take those questions for you. But let's hear about total automation program yield. Back to the Agilify team.
Yeah, so what factors do we feel organizations miss with aligning their business case to total cost of ownership or forecasting yield? So we're seeing many organizations in the beginning of their automation journey as it exists today. The factors with the most hype, and rightfully so, are the return on investment or the offset of the current workload, resources, and or the labor arbitrage. And why not? It's possible to see same year payback. But if you can gain alignment with your company's other business goals, you can start to see automation's other advantages. What we're currently seeing within our delivery is around the quality, risk and control, speed to market, customer experience, the employee experience, and what they do day to day. And the one that we found really fascinating was automating jobs that no humans would or could do. Could you imagine doing 100% sample of journal entry audits? Or what if you could accomplish this with human resources? What about the validation of 100% of suppliers and automated lookup of payments tied to their contracts? These are just a few topics that we really focus on in our executive workshop. Lee has been a great partner with Agilify, thinking outside of the typical measurements of just ROI. Lee, would you mind explaining on some of the details of the concept of total automation program yield?
Sure. I think when we talk about TAPY or the total program yield, when we all begin with task harvesting, which I think is a very worthwhile pursuit. In fact, that's how we began. We began looking for things that people did and said, can we automate those things? And a great place to start, great place to become familiar with the tools, to become familiar with the complexities of automation and process transformation, the way that jobs, roles, and work is transformed when you introduce automation. All of those are fantastic. But there's so much more that can be done with strategic automation. And when you talk about a total program yield, folks that are in their first 6 months or 12 months may not really be thinking about a total program yield yet. They're really still harvesting tasks. And again, I would encourage you to continue to harvest tasks because they create financial capacity for you to invest in strategic automation that allows you to generate benefits that may not have that easily found hard dollar savings. So when we talk about reputation management, can you imagine if on a bank statement you had a single error, a single defect on your bank statement, and that hit the Wall Street Journal? When you think about taking a service that used to be only available in a person-to-person exchange and making that available self-service on a nearly instantaneous basis on something that may have taken a week before. When you are capable of changing a customer's experience and using automation to do that, how do you measure the benefit of your customer turnover? These are all benefits that you really need to think about in advance. What's your cost of customer acquisition? What is your typical customer attrition and turnover? And so when you make an investment that may have a meaningful impact on customer experience, and I'll use a simple example. In the services business, we do a lot of things that take days or weeks to complete. And when somebody that we're serving hands us their problem, they're not really sure. Are we working on that? Is something happening with that task that I just asked you for? Well, what if I were able to use automation to text you or email you or put a push alert to your application that tells you as your piece of work moves through each phase of progress until it gets completed? Well, that has a trust impact, which has a customer experience impact, which changes your customer attrition rate. So how do you measure that? How do you put value on that? You might be able to say everybody here knows that it's good, but how do you establish a value on that? And so when we talk about the total program yield, it needs to be a balance of things that save real money, so that you can use some of that to pay for things that are a lot harder to measure. Compliance is another great example. How much do you spend to prove to a regulatory agency that you're compliant? Well, I don't know the answer to that, but I can tell you that if you use automation to perform certain tasks, you have a record of every single task that was completed and are able to provide that instantaneously to the regulatory agency, whoever it might be, and literally in seconds prove your compliance in an exercise that may have taken months before. And these are the sorts of things where automation, when you talk about the total program yield, you have to have these conversations early. What is that worth to the organization? When you reduce risk by using automation to take people out of the equation, almost all controls in an organization were put in place to prevent or manage human misbehavior, intentional or non-intentional. So if you can take the human out of that particular piece of the process, you can literally remove a control. You no longer need a control. Well, what was that costing the organization? When you remove that and you no longer carry that risk, what's that worth to the organization? And so when we start to talk about program yield, and we move into strategic automation, having these conversations about these things that you can do with automation that are far beyond task harvesting, you have to have those and establish how much are we going to invest in this and how much do we think it's worth.
Yeah, absolutely. And I remember, early on in our automation journey, we were really focused on those short-term, those easy, low-hanging fruits. And as we started to shift and really change into finding the true benefits, things got really fun and interesting for us as we started to really investigate those new areas.
Yeah, this is one of those areas where I have to say Agilify has been amazing because their 6-year, I guess going on almost 7 years now, worth of experience has really enabled Ascension to participate and build strategic automation plans for all of our service lines. And most folks are, and rightly so, out there, saving the FTEs and returning hours to the business, all good stuff. But you do reach a certain upper limit to that, and then you reach a point where you say, okay, so what's next? And that's just key. So to do this well, we talk about, what's the role of the COE in this space. And I want to make sure that we get clear on the difference between the people doing the building and production management of automation as opposed to the COE. The COE is a smaller group of people who are making policy decisions, who are guiding the program, establishing the strategy. And so when you start talking about program yield, establishing at the COE level, what are we going to consider the cost, the investment, and what are we going to consider the return or the benefit, and how are we going to value that? That really becomes key. And having an advisor that has done this with lots of customers and has different ways to think about measuring the benefit from a lot of different kinds of automation is really helpful. Yeah,
there's something to be said about a value partner instead of just taking what is on the table and what is the understood of what's the possible. having a partner come in and say, yes, that's great, and you will get value there, but extending that and saying, if you really think about it maybe this way, or if you're thinking about it through quality, or you're thinking it through, risk and compliance, does that change the way that the automations can be presented, at the same time looking for continuous improvement opportunities? That's great.
Yeah.
All right. We'll move on to the next question here. So how much of a challenge was it to implement an effective change management program, and where did the obstacles arise? Training, leadership, or speed of change with the adoption of the tool? And personally, I think it's all of them. We talk about this in great detail in the IAH1 report. This might be one of our greatest lessons learned as practitioners first. Understanding the true impact from an employee's perspective cannot be overlooked. Like most disruptive innovations have, an organizational change management plan is critical. Where Agilify is different, we understand that each organization is unique and not having one-size-fits-all program. Gaining an understanding of who and at what level is driving the initiative, executive or mid-level, single department, or enterprise-wide. And when in the past has there been success in rolling out major change? These are the items that we really do focus on when we're delivering on a change management workshop.
Yeah, change management, Scott. I think you'll remember several years ago you and I had a conversation, and I was pretty upset with you because the program slowed way down.
Yeah.
And I remember you said to me, Lee, you can hold me accountable, but I'm telling you that we are going to fail together because we have to solve this together. I can't do this alone. I remember that conversation. And I remember the work that we did after that to go find out what was going on. Why had the program, the program was so much excitement in the beginning, and everybody was not having to do, the horrible swivel chair and cut and paste stuff that they wanted, that they hated doing. And then all of a sudden they started noticing that jobs weren't being backfilled. Yeah. And their work was changing every month. Automation anxiety set in.
Absolutely, and what we were seeing were the subject matter experts no longer showed up to meetings anymore. Mm-hmm. We saw that no longer was their calendars open for investigation work. They really started to become really hands off. Really closed down to ideas on the art of the possible. Mm-hmm. And without that, you're really not able to drive innovation in a silo.
Yeah, and the resulting work from that, there's more, I think, to say here in terms of what we learned together in terms of how people react to automation. And I think another important thing that Agilify brought to the table, and I want to make sure this is really clear for folks, is that the change management, it comes in three flavors: IT change management, business change management, and organizational or people change management. They are all really important, and they all need to have a plan behind them. What we were just talking about is kind of the people change management. Really, what's happening in people's minds, and we absolutely we probably spent a year or a year and a half developing a plan for how do we message folks. The work that we did together to discover what was emotionally going on with folks? Why were they resistant? And I think one of the key discoveries for me that Agilify helped me understand was one of the most profound barriers were the frontline supervisors. As you said, Scott, the subject matter experts and their sudden unavailability was remarkable how quickly that happened. But then we found out that supervisors, their whole idea of self-worth, their idea of their value in work had been for their whole life measured by how many people they managed.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And all of a sudden, well, I used to manage 20 people. Now I manage 6. And I'm still responsible for this work product, but now I can't actually go up and talk to people and find out how the work is going. I don't have insight into, is the work being processed by my digital labor? And the 6 people that I still manage, they're doing different work. And this is so unsettling to management. And really, again, we spent a lot of time working together to develop the plans for how do you message that?
Yeah.
How do you prepare management for that? How do you give them insight into the work being done? And then how do you message, for the folks that their work is being transformed?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's something to be said about when you're starting up your automation program. There's an understanding of the training and what I'm going to do from a tools perspective. There's how do I take this thing and how do I make it successful? You're so busy on focusing on the product and or the tools and how you're going to get this automation program going that you're really not looking at a training perspective for how it's going to impact everybody else.
Yeah.
And having that great understanding right up front to say, hey, there are likely a couple of different training opportunities here, right? You've got tool specific, you've got your subject matter experts, and how do you start preparing business processes? How do you start getting your pipeline really mature? But then how are you going to train the individuals that it's going to really impact, right? There's a lot of conversations around how do you prepare for this overall change that should be pretty insignificant. In fact, it's pretty exciting, but yet it's still really scary because it changes what you do every day.
Yeah, and so, our first, if I think about the phases in which we encountered change management issues, first up was IT change management. Mm-hmm. We thought we were pretty good at IT change management. And what we discovered, I'll never forget it, one day, and people will say that a bot, never gets sick, it never goes on vacation. That is true. I will agree with that. But bots will go on strike. They'll flip you the bird on their way out the door, and they won't tell you why they went on strike. And IT change is one of those areas where automation brings an all new level of IT change management requirements. I mean, if you think about it, a bot can't sit at the change approval board and say, if you make this change, you'll break me. So, okay, so what do you do? How do you, well, hopefully you have an advisor who knows how to evolve your ITCM process to take that into account. When you're going through major upgrades, you need somebody to explain to IT why they need to give you testing environments in order to test these things. So I think we first hit IT change management, in our early days, just learning how to keep stuff running that we had already automated, and Agilify helped us to change our process and our templates, the information that we captured, so that we could do ITCM in a way that accounted for automation.
Yeah, I recall one such incident where we were having conversations with the IT change board. We were really driving in and asking a lot of hard questions around, what change is going to impact our bots or our automations. And up, down, side the other, no, nothing's changed. And lo and behold, after a 3-day fight, we found out that a patch was put in that we weren't notified about.
It was a pre-approved change, right? So it didn't even go through the cache.
I'm sorry, it was a standard change.
It was a standard change.
It was a standard change. No screen impacted users.
That's right.
Yeah.
This is the sort of thing where if you don't understand what group policy does, there's a laundry list of things that need to change with IT change management, with automation. I hope your advisor is up to the task. But the next most significant one, and this is probably one where I think Agilify has some secret sauce here that I don't know anybody else has. And we call it, Scott, business change management.
We do. Yeah.
And what we discovered, the challenges, some of the challenges, some of the hair-raising, oh my gosh, what are we going to do moments, as we realized, so we worked together with IT, we made changes there, that got better, and then we realized that if people just did stuff differently, it could have the same effect as somebody making a software change. But how on earth do you manage when people do things differently? And I think we probably spent 2 years with Agilify developing a method for detecting when somebody wanted to make a process change, and then B, what to do with it, how to process that. Maybe you want to talk about the business change approval board.
Yeah. So when we really got down to the understandings of process itself, there are so many upstream and downstream impacts that really go along with something a small change. Maybe it's just how we're interacting with the screen, or maybe how we've utilized a text field in a different way. When procure to pay within some kind of the invoice changed their small process, which shouldn't have any downstream, all of a sudden accounting, who needs to start looking at for cost accounting, says, oh my gosh, I no longer have my information, what's going on, and now they're dead in the water. So really pulling together this single point of contact, this champion of change, much like in any ITIL organization, right? You've got this change review board where organizationally you're coming together, you're reviewing these change. We're saying first, hey, I'm going to declare that I have this type of change.
And this is important. The kind of change we're talking about isn't a piece of software.
It's not a piece of software.
This is I'm going to, my CI team has detected that I should change my process this way, so I'm going to do my work in this order instead of this order. And that would never have hit the radar before.
No.
It's entirely within my team. It's my people. I should be able to have them change the order in which they get their work done. But, oh my gosh, the automation has an assumption that the work is being done in this order, and when we change it, it's going straight.
Yeah, and it's always going to work in that fashion. And when you have cross-functional teams, this becomes a real requirement to ensure that everybody really understands what the change is, to weigh in and give the appropriate time to make the adjustment, so that you're not really lost time or the boss gets sick.
And there's I remember some of our other learnings at that time, Scott, about kind of the only people that were in a position to be able to say, hey, if you change this work process, this piece of automation is going to need to be changed or fixed or enhanced. And then we started to have so much automation that we needed like every single developer who had ever developed a piece of software to sit in a meeting and listen to these proposed changes. And I think, maybe you can say more about what Agilify did to change the documentation requirements for production automation so that you actually are capable of assessing proposed process change against your production automation.
Yeah, absolutely. In the early days, it was the Wild Wild West, as we're really just trying to figure out the best way to get automations in production, right? We're chasing the low-hanging fruits, the ROIs, the same year payback. We weren't necessarily thinking about a long-term organizational design or design authority within the bots themselves. So having a moment, and if you remember, we had a conversation about we probably need to hold on to our automation program here. We need to really take a look because there's some real lessons learned when you look at software development lifecycle. Some of the things that are traditionally put in place when you think about code reuse, when you think about how things move from release management into operational support. We really felt like it was a great marriage between some of this new age, new innovation, quick, really empowering the subject matter experts to be able to code themselves, right? I put up the finger quotes, right, around code because it's not necessarily coding, but you don't necessarily want everybody just being able to do anything they wanted because at the end of the day, those individuals who did the configuration or the development are going to be the ones that are going to be supporting it. When you have 17 different automations that are all doing different types of logins to the same ERP system, you got to ask yourself, what am I doing here? So being able to pull together some design standards, some coding standards, putting together another board of standards review to say, we need to make changes. How is this going to impact the overall automations and how they're used? But then through the efficiencies of coding standards, you make the change in one place, and then all the automations that are utilizing that really
I have to say that the design authority turned out to be the development of that capability turned the corner for us.
Yeah,
it really did, and we did put the program on hold. We didn't stop our production automation, but there was no question that we could not continue to roll out more automation until we had this stuff locked down, because we're projecting forward into the number of people developing and supporting production automation. It was totally unscalable. And when you come back to talking about total automation program yield, this becomes another one of those things where having that business change management and having the design authority to manage ITCM and BCM become just essential to your scaling. But I do want to come back to the people change side of things again, because there's a couple of things that I think are really important to touch on. And when we talk about the individuals, will my company train me, is really, really important. There are a lot of folks, and we learned together analyzing our folks who were doing the work in terms of what were they afraid of. And they were really afraid of the fact that we wouldn't stand behind them and upskill them to the new work. And so I want to make sure to touch on that because, I think having a plan in advance, having open, honest dialogue in advance, I think your advice to us of showing, not telling, as certain teams shrunk and we moved people onto different teams, we were in a position to now tell, not show, show, not tell. And the other piece that I think is really I wanted to make sure we touched on is. And I think you might have been there, Scott. We had some service delivery problems, and we had people representing our digital labor in the room, and we had our human labor in the room. And if you remember, the human labor blamed the digital labor for the mistakes that had happened, and it brought us to this whole new world of, oh my gosh, this is human-digital labor relations. What is this stuff? And how on earth are we going to manage it? Because now they're developing personalities, they're becoming integral, and they're playing real roles in mission-critical services. And there's a relationship that needs to be managed.
Yeah, no, that was a critical point where we actually started to name our bots and start giving them personality, right? I think it's so important to bring kind of that human element to that personal relationship with that digital workforce that changes the game. We've had other clients where they've set up an actual workstation sitting next to them, and they've called it Sarah's workstation, and it's where donuts get placed for the digital bot, right? So there's some fun that gets played in that aspect also. So.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to. I want to make sure to appropriately emphasize that when you have 2 or 3 bots that are doing a few things that most people don't want to do anyway, not that big a deal. When you're in the world of talking about total program yield and you're in the triple digits in terms of major pieces of automation, this notion of digital labor relations becomes a very real thing.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I guess we'll move on. I'm going to go on to the next topic. That was really great dialogue, Lee. Thank you. So as we were looking at change management and those 3 different levels, we start looking at some of the roadblocks organizations experience when they approach intelligent automation projects or initiatives as an IT project versus a business-led initiative to solve the problem. And I know that we found, that there was a lot of internal confusion and frustrations in the early days. What are some of your thoughts on this one, Lee?
So we certainly watched, and the Gartner hype and adoption curves, I think, have been proven out on just about every kind of technology, and automation is really no different in this respect. And so we saw a lot of failures. We saw a lot of people, a lot of consulting organizations, if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it must be a duck. And so let's treat it like a duck. Well, what's interesting about it is that this is not a duck. This is not a typical piece of enterprise software. Something that I like to say a lot is that an automation platform is like a box of possibility because it has limitless value. It really depends on what you do with it. So, in the most dramatic failures of the early programs, it really boiled down to thinking that this thing was an IT thing, that it was a piece of software that had business logic encoded in it, and that you could use the same tools and processes and techniques that IT had been using for the last 30 years to buy software. Right? You develop 125 requirements, you run an RFX, RFP, RFQ, you do a beauty pageant, you spend $400,000 worth of people's time, you develop a use case on like this big gnarly process with 25 exception paths. You go through the contracting and the negotiating, and you just spend $500,000 to buy a $200,000 piece of software, and then you spend 6 or 9 months trying to build it, but you picked the wrong process, and big surprise, it failed. And so this, I think, is one of the most fundamental learnings, is that intelligent automation is a business-led program. In the same way that you wouldn't ask IT folks to come into your shop and do purchasing work or accounting work or customer service work, that's not an indictment against IT folks. It's not what they do. Digital labor is people doing the digital work of that part of the business, and using digital labor to do that work. And that means that there's a very specific role and responsibility for parts of the organization. And this extends as well to procurement. How on earth, if you're a procurement person, are you supposed to buy a piece of software or select a piece of software when you don't have the R? you have a business case, and somebody says, well, what's the return on this investment? And somebody's like, well, it could be nothing, or it could be $500 million. Well, what do I do with that, right? And the determinant, the owner of the R is the business. How much is the business driving the growth of the COE, the development, deployment, and management of the automation, and the change management work that has to occur there? Again, I can remember, Scott, some of the folks, from Agilify, just as recently as a year ago, as we really, Agilify brought us an approach that said, let's actually manage, let's measure the total program yield. Let's take an approach here and say, let's look at the total amount that we're spending and everything that we're getting for it. I don't think anybody else out there, I'm not aware of anybody in the industry that has a program yield advisory offering, but this is reaching a level of maturity now, this IA space, where I think more and more organizations are going to be asking for somebody to come in and say, how do I track all of my investments, from subject matter expert times to server rack space to fill in the blank, to all of my returns, both the easy to find hard dollar returns as well as those strategic returns that are harder to find. And when you buy a piece of software like this, again, it's just a box of possibility.
I really enjoy that, Lee. And when you think about buying off-the-shelf type products, there's a very specific business case. There's a problem that's been solved with that.
That's right.
And understanding from an IT's perspective, that's what they're good at, right? And really understanding, what a problem statement is, and then finding software to really match up to that, or custom develop the product itself. And hearing you talk about the big box of possibilities, I really like to compare that to Lincoln Logs, right? When you buy them as a kid, you open up your Lincoln Logs, and there is no real instruction to it, right? It's the art of the possible. It's really, can I start to be creative to start solving whatever it is that I want to do? And from a business perspective, that's where the real creativity comes in, and you're not necessarily pulling, right? And that was in the early days of Agilify being in there. We were really trying to pull it out, and I'm sitting there with these Lincoln Logs sitting in front of me saying, okay, what kind of cabin do you want? Do you want windows? Do you want green versus an orange, right? And the business is looking at me going, I don't even know what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, right.
But really getting the Lincoln Logs and showing them what they can do with it, then the juices start to flow, right? And that's when the real possibilities start coming out of it. So I
love the Lincoln Log analogy. It's so true, because you can or Tinker Toys.
Yeah,
right?
Tinker Toys. Right.
Same idea.
Yeah.
There's so many different things you could do with it, and this is the same thing, because you're buying an infinite variety of combinations that can be assembled to produce business value, and I think that concept is probably, like, when I talk to folks, it's one of the biggest points I try to make, is that this is really importantly different. There's such a critical distinction between this and the standard piece of enterprise software, because there's no business logic in it, and it's evident, how many organizations are really grappling with this. About, I guess, a little over a year ago now, there was a study done of almost 100 failed programs, and they just under half of them had failed because IT led the program. Somebody said, well, this is software, so it must be an IT thing, and IT led the program, and they treated it as we just talked about. And in about 80% of the remaining half, so if you do the math on that, it's about 80% of the total, the business led the program, but they led it like an IT program. The same basic idea, and they didn't establish a program around it. It was an event. It was a project, as opposed to putting together a COE that understands the notion of this limitless potential and the fact that you can't throw it over the fence to IT and expect to generate value from it. You've really got to have the business in the lead, and you've got to create the capacity. I remember actually Agilify when we did the resource mapping for the early COE, and the shocking chart that you guys put in front of us that showed the subject matter expert problem, that we were shy by about a factor of 3 on subject matter experts. And so the recommendation to me was that I go hire people to come in as supervisors or managers so that we could take our subject matter experts offline and put them to work doing automation. Having that analysis in hand and being able to see exactly how much subject matter expertise capacity we had versus what we needed to be successful was a dramatic shift for the program.
Yeah, the only other thing I would add on to that, because that's great, is when you're thinking about the Lincoln Log analogy or the Tinker Toys, as you're looking at scaling out or starting to create your automation program, those individuals that can really take the Tinker Toys and make something is the talent that you're looking for.
Yeah, you don't need people that know how to build new round wooden logs. Right. Those are not the people you need.
Yeah, when you think about, we're looking at children sitting on the floor playing with the Tinker Toys, how many of them just get away because they're really, really frustrated because they can't see the art of the possible, right?
Yeah.
It's those children who are sitting there that are continuing to build, and they want to make it bigger and brighter, and those are the individuals that you really look for within your automation program. So
I guess a question for us here, and I'll see what our inbound question volume is. We do have a couple of things to say about machine learning and intelligent automation, but maybe I'll just check in and see how are we doing on questions, and should we divert to questions?
Yeah, I actually see one here that is near and dear to my heart. David Kirk from MTM Tech asked the question around, does it make sense to treat all aspects of a bot as continuous improvement in a CMDB? If any of those CIs change, should it trigger changes to a bot?
Interestingly, and it's an awesome question. So I think a CMDB and the CIs, now you're going to have to redefine CIs. Mm-hmm. And there are going to be new CIs that are people-based and process-based that are not technology-based. But actually using a CMDB is a really clever way to begin to do this. I would suggest that you have an advisor with you who might be able to give you some pointers in terms of how to think about CIs differently. But yes, that is absolutely a viable way to put detective equipment into your enterprise to manage this kind of change.
Yeah, so I should have actually called it out. So CIs are configuration items within the ITIL standard libraries and the change management database.
So both you and I have run IT before.
Yeah, so when you start getting into ITIL, things get really fun here because there is a lot more practical application within the library than just focused on IT, right? There's a lot of practical applications within a business and running an operations that we both find very intriguing. So let's see.
Any other questions jumping off the page, or do we want to talk real quickly about the sexy intelligence part?
You know me, Lee. I love this new space. I love cognitive. I love the possibility of future. So if you're going to leave it up to me, I'm going to dive right into kind of that fun place. So I think the question that I wanted to bring up for you was how do you align your machine learning or cognitive to your business initiatives when you're really shoulder deep in your automation program? How do you make that turn? How do you start listening to not only the hype that's out there and the art of the possible when you're looking at what's on TV, right, in the movies, and what's actually practical in the space?
Yeah, it's kind of a leading question, Scott, because I challenged Agilify with this years ago.
You absolutely did.
And the answer was, how do we enable intelligence in our automation program? And those were very specifically my words. So as we take more tasks offline, we're left with things that are increasingly going to be simple, predictive orchestration decisions that we want technology to make. And I guess what I would share is that, well, first I would suggest to everyone, do not fall into the trap of moving straight into machine learning and augmented intelligence. There is so much to learn, so much to know, and one of the things that Agilify really brought with your technical alliances, and I think it's worth noting that some of your, in the Agilify ecosystem, there are some really, really capable partners that were really helpful to us in this journey. But it basically, automation, if you're really thoughtful about it, you can be planful and mindful as you build your automation to establish a structure around a knowledge domain in which you think you might have a future use case, that you can make some assessments about whether or not something is actually learnable. In the absence of having an automation provider who also is familiar with cognitive systems, you're not going to be building your automation in a way that exists in a defined knowledge domain and that is creating learnable data. And just for definition purposes, learnable data is anything that is known to positively or negatively contribute to inference or to the prediction. And the final thing, and I know we went through a lot of pain together.
We did.
And we actually put this whole program on hold for 9 months based on this bottom block here called infrastructure. And we thought we were pretty darn good, right? We're a top 20 most admired shared service center. We thought our data was pretty squared away. And what we learned is our infrastructure was not even close to up to the task. We didn't understand structured and unstructured data. We had to learn new things like data veracity and data velocity, landing zones and transformation zones and HDFS stacks, and a totally different way of managing huge amounts of data. But tying that back to building automation to generate that data that will fuel your data models of the future. I think one of the things we learned, one of the most valuable things we learned is to really be thinking a year or two ahead about use cases that might be learnable, so that as we build automation, we're creating or recreating data that we don't have, didn't have, or wouldn't have unless we use automation to perform the tasks in order to generate the data that will eventually feed the model. And that, I think, is probably the key here with Agilify and your ecosystem partners over the last 3 years, is as our first cognitive systems have gone into production.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that lessons learned, it definitely has kept us from heading down the data science experiment route, right? There was plenty of opportunities where we were really excited about the art of the possible, but instead of getting all of the data and let's go all at full force, 6 months later to find out that we really didn't have the data, asking the right questions up front. Do we have the data infrastructure? What are the data points? What are those features that are going to really drive us to the right cognitive decision? We've avoided a lot of wasted money and data science experiments.
And I got to tell the story, Scott, because I remember being pretty peeved with you because I wanted us to perform a test. I wanted the program to move, right? We had put the program on pause. We had built the data infrastructure, and I remember your point to me, and your advice was, Lee, we can't proceed until I can figure out a way to prove that it's the technology that's making the prediction and not data scientists, that the data model is actually making the prediction. And I have to say that the combination of Agilify's automation experience, their data experience, cognitive systems experience, their ecosystem, and the very thoughtful approach made all the difference in our whole cognitive systems program.
That's great, and I really want to thank you for today. It was a really great discussion, and looking forward to continuing through our automation journey together. Rochelle, back to you.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks for that. We're short on time, but I think we can have time for 2 questions. Thanks to everyone that are just pouring in. So I do want to let you know what we don't get to today, we'll be passing over to the Agilify team, and they will be sending you an email response. So Lee, let me get to the first one for you. Ernesto would like to know if you would recommend some type of assessment related to automation level. And specifically what he's talking about here is basically the appetite for how much an organization can absorb automation to the point of change, and also how much they really have that should be automated. So it's kind of twofold. One is the assessment on the number of processes that can be automated, and the second is their appetite and their ability to handle that given the level of change going on in an organization.
The answer is yes to both, and I think Agilify, one of the things Agilify does really well is something called BAFA, which is business analysis for automation, and there's BAFA for business case, which is a way to consistently assess processes for how ripe they are for automation. And interestingly, in terms of the capacity for an organization to absorb automation, my experience has been, not just mine, but as I've talked to others, is that it often tracks pretty well with your natural attrition rate. So to expect to go get 30 or 40 or 50% productivity in a 12 or 18 month period, probably not going to happen. But absolutely establishing a what's possible, and then pacing that out over an appropriate portion of time, and then using all the stuff we talked about in terms of change management to make sure that that's successful. Definitely recommend those assessments. They will make your program far more effective.
All right, thank you so much for that. Here's another one from Dylan. Do you generally ensure that resources are available to manually support mission-critical processes when bots go on strike? Or is that risk of impact of service delivery just understood and accepted?
Yeah. So there's another service that Agilify offers called Controls and Audit for Automation. And it's an advisory service. We didn't talk about it today, but that's an incredibly insightful conversation. So process selection and staying away from mission-critical processes and staying away from control processes in your beginning is strongly advised until you learn how to educate your auditors and how to manage risk. It was, in fact, 5 years ago that we experienced a failure where a fleet of bots went offline and there was no human being left in the building that remembered how to do the process. So this sort of risk management is why having a robust program is so important. Knowing how to do highly available infrastructure and implementations of the tools, how to do documentation so that if you have a fleet of bots that goes on strike, that you can actually reasonably retrain people. It may not be the most elegant, but in an emergency, you can still get through. So maximizing the availability of your automation, thinking through risk differently, and doing that before audit shows up. There are some deep scars here from those experiences.
Yeah, and the last piece that is highly recommended is that each bot is a business continuity plan, right? It's the understanding of if it doesn't work, how does it manually get done? And the overall understanding is that it was manual at one time. Knowing that there's a chance that process improvement has changed the process so that it isn't exactly how it used to be, but how would the work still get done in the event that the bots do go on strike? You may not have all of the people available to be able to do that work in a down situation, but at least you would have the documentation required if that case doesn't.
Yeah, it's both sides, right? It's one, doing everything to make sure that you have high resilience in your automation, and also having basically a business continuity plan.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And that needs to be part of your design authority.
Yes.
Right? The design authority needs to be looking at the build and the documentation and the risk management plan as a part of approving that automation before it goes into production.
Fantastic, and we're exactly at the hour, so unfortunately we'll have to leave it with that. I do want to say thank you so much for the very many people that sent questions in, and look forward to those answers coming back in email. Let me thank both Lee and Scott. It's wonderful to have both the tools and the methodology and that background coupled with an actual client use case to show how that was used. And thank you, Lee, for your frankness about the challenges you encountered. And I particularly like the what happens when bots go on strike and give you that little gesture that means that they're not too happy with you. So that will stick with me as well. Thanks to all of you who have listened to this live session, and to those of you who are joining us on the on-demand session. We certainly appreciate that as well. I did want to highlight to everyone that we will open up tomorrow, day 2 of the World Series at 9:30 a.m. U.S. Eastern Standard Time. We have 4 fantastic sessions for you tomorrow as well. We're going to be kicking off with managing the combined human and digital workforce, continuing on this very discussion that we had today, and then 3 more sessions to follow that. So thanks, Lee. Thanks, Scott. Thanks to all of you. And with that, this now concludes today's webinar session.